The water erupts. Not a wave, not a ripple. A column of water rising 15 feet into the pre-dawn dark, straight up, defying physics, defying gravity, like something beneath the surface has reached up to pull the sky down into itself. For 7 seconds, the river stands, vertical, impossible, feeding. Then it collapses back into itself. The surface goes smooth, glass flat, like nothing happened, like nothing was just taken. 40 minutes away in a hospital room in Enugu City, a nurse is trying to take a 1-day-old baby from a woman who will not let go. The woman is screaming one word over and over, "Why?" Not crying it, screaming it. The baby was perfect 12 hours ago, full term, healthy, strong first cry, the kind of delivery where doctors smile and say congratulations and everyone exhales. And then somewhere between the 4 a.m. feeding and the 6 a.m. check, the baby stopped. No warning, no distress, no medical explanation that will ever make sense. Just stopped. This is the 3rd time this has happened to this woman. 3 full-term pregnancies, 3 healthy births, 3 babies that drew their first breath and then within days simply stopped drawing the next one. The doctors have a word for it: unexplained. Her mother-in-law, sitting in the corner of that hospital room with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed and her eyes completely dry, has a different word, but she will never say it out loud. She will never. This is Echoes of Wisdom by Crystal. And what I'm about to tell you is not a ghost story. It's a contract written by a desperate woman, signed at a river, paid for with children who were born alive and then delivered piece by piece, breath by breath, to something that should not still exist in the 21st century. 3 sons, 3 wives, and a price so dark it doesn't have a name. Stay with me, because the woman who survives this story didn't survive by being good. She survived by being smart enough to ask the one question she'd spent her entire life avoiding. And that question saved her life. They always told her, "Zara, find a good man." But nobody told her what good meant. So she made her own definition. And that definition almost swallowed her whole. Zara Obi was the kind of smart that people admire from a distance and underestimate up close. She read rooms like architects read blueprints, structurally, precisely, cataloging weak points before anyone realized they were being studied. She was 28 years old and she had a list. Not written down, she wasn't obvious. It lived in her head, organized and unshakable, like a filing cabinet behind her eyes. She'd been building it since she was 19, sitting in her mother's single-room apartment in Enugu, watching her mother's knees give out from decades of standing at a market stall. Her mother, Adana, was a beautiful woman, a good woman, church 3 times a week, soft voice, never complained out loud, only in the way her shoulders curved forward by 8 p.m. every night, carrying invisible weight. Adana had married for love. A brilliant man with poetry in his mouth and nothing in his pocket. He meant well, he tried, but meaning well doesn't give school fees, and trying without succeeding is just a long, expensive performance that ends with a woman's knees giving out at 52. Watching all of this, Zara was 10 when she made her first silent decision. She was 19 when she refined it into strategy. She was 23 when she turned down Chidi, sweet Chidi, who would have walked through fire for her because his highest ambition was a government job in Usuka, and Zara's ambitions had outgrown Usuka before she could spell it. She was not cruel about it. She simply redirected. Because Zara understood something most women her age were still learning, that beauty is currency, but beauty paired with intelligence is an investment portfolio. She was both, and she knew it. By 28, she was working at a consulting firm in Lagos, living in a shared flat in Lekki Phase 1. Not Phase 2, Phase 1. She made that distinction clearly. Dressing at the edge of her salary, maintaining the appearance of a woman who had already arrived, so the right doors would open faster. The list had 5 items. Family money, not salary. Legacy, the kind built before he was born. a mother-in-law who genuinely liked her. She'd watched too many brilliant women get dismantled by a woman with a wooden spoon and a long memory. A name that opened doors. In Nigeria, a last name is a passport. Some passports get you farther than others. The kind of house that silenced your enemies, not flashy, quiet, old money confidence. Children, but children born into something solid, something chosen. That was the list. She called it being intentional. She called it learning from her mother's mistakes. Her best friend Kamsi always listened with one eyebrow raised and said absolutely nothing. That eyebrow should have been a warning sign. Zara never read it. In January of that year, Zara met Tobena Eze at a wedding in Victoria Island, not as a guests plus one. She'd almost refused because she had a report due Monday and her edges needed redoing, and she was tired in the specific way you are tired when you are working very hard towards something that hasn't arrived yet. Thank God for undone edges, because Tobena Eze walked into that hall and Zara's filing cabinet opened on its own. Tobena, second son of the Eze family of Uzala, Enugu State, 33 years old, built like a man who trained out of discipline, not vanity. A face that was more interesting than handsome, strong jaw, eyes that were too steady, the particular stillness of a man who'd never had to chase anything because things had always reorganized themselves in his direction. He was wearing a native that cost more than Zara's rent. But it wasn't the fabric. It was the way the entire hall recalibrated when he walked in. The way the host, a man worth 8 figures, stood up to embrace him. The way 3 different women tracked him with their eyes and looked away when their husband noticed. Zara did not look away. She repositioned. By the end of the cocktail hour, she'd engineered 3 separate near encounters and determined he was interested, but not desperate. She liked that. Desperate men were exhausting. Men who didn't chase were a different sport entirely. She let him come to her on his own timeline. He did, before the second course. "You've been avoiding me," he said, sitting beside her with the ease of a man who'd never been told to move. "I don't know you," Zara said, without looking up. "How do you avoid someone you don't know?" He smiled. Later, she would describe that smile to Kamsi as the smile of a man who was used to winning. But the evening was loud and golden, and his cologne was doing something illegal to her concentration. And by the time the night ended, she had his number, and the first item on her mental checklist was glowing. They dated for 7 months. 7 months that Zara spent like a scientist, collecting data, verifying. She checked all 5 items on her list and every single one came back perfect. The Eze family land was ancestral. Property in Enugu, Lagos, Abuja. Tobenha ran the family's construction arm as a director. The money had roots. Mama Eze, Uloaku, came to Lagos in March and met Zara over pepper soup in Ikoyi. The woman was magnetic, 60-something with the posture of someone 40 years younger. She held Zara's hands across the table and said, "Finally, you are the first one I feel something about." Zara floated home. The Eze name appeared in state politics, construction contracts, church donor lists. It opened doors. In certain rooms, it ended arguments before they started. She visited the family home in Enugu in April, and the car turned into a compound so vast her mind couldn't process the architecture all at once. The generator didn't roar. It hummed, the low, confident hum of something that had never known shortage. Zara stood in that compound and felt something settle inside her chest she never felt before. She called it love. Maybe the distance between what she felt and what she decided to feel had collapsed so completely, she genuinely couldn't tell them apart anymore. Which is perhaps the most dangerous place a strategic woman can arrive, when strategy and emotion become the same thing and she can no longer audit either one. She drove back to Lagos and called Kamsi. "I'm going to marry him." 3 seconds of silence. Then, "Are you marrying him or the compound?" "Kamsi, I'm asking sincerely." "Both," Zara said and laughed. "I'm joking. I love him." "You've known him 7 months. My mother knew my father 3 months before they married." "And how did that go?" Zara hung up. Her mother's warning came 2 weeks later. Adana had visited Lagos, and Zara made the mistake of showing her pictures of the compound with too much brightness in her voice. Adana looked at the pictures. looked at her daughter, put the phone down. Zara, who are these people? What do you mean? The Eze family? I didn't ask where they are from. I asked who they are. They are good people, Mommy. An Oma can be wonderful and still keep things you should know. What things? You haven't even met them. And you've been with this man 7 months. You've visited once. You know his mother's pepper soup is good and the compound has 2 buildings. That is not knowing people, Zara. That is knowing their surface. Zara smiled, patient, practiced. Mommy, you worry too much. Her mother looked at her for a long time. Something moved behind her eyes. Not worry, recognition. Adana had seen the closed door look on her daughter's face, the already decided look. So she said nothing. That silence became the second warning Zara didn't read. They got engaged in August on a rooftop in Ikoyi. The wedding was set for March in Enugu. 7 months of planning. Mama Oluwaku was involved in everything. The Ashoibi was deep wine sourced from London. The venue was a luxury event center. The guest list had names that made Zara's mouth go dry. On the morning of the traditional wedding, before the makeup artist arrived, Adana sat beside Zara in the quiet preparation room and took her daughter's face in both hands. She looked at her. For a long moment, she just looked at her the way mothers look at their children when they understand the child has grown into someone they can no longer protect by holding, someone they can only release and pray over. She opened her mouth, and Zara saw it coming, saw the words gathering. She reached up and covered her mother's hands and said softly, "I'm happy, Mommy. I promise you, I am happy." Adana looked at her, closed her mouth, smiled. Then, that is enough. God go with you, my daughter. She kissed her forehead, stood up, left. And Zara turned back to the mirror and did not let herself examine what she had just prevented her mother from saying. The weddings were everything. Zara walked down that aisle and the organ swelled, and she saw Tobenna, and something moved through her that had nothing to do with compound or names. In that moment, she was simply a woman walking toward a man, and it felt like grace. But 2 rows from the back, a woman sat with her hands clasped tight in her lap and watched the bride with an expression that was not joy, not envy, something closer to grief. Her name was Sochima, wife of Adimchi, the first son, married 5 years, no children. Nobody looked at her face. The flowers were too extravagant. The photographer was moving too fast. The organ was too loud. Sochima watched Zara walk into the family. And something moved through her eyes. Something that said, I should warn her. And then, underneath that, quieter, darker. But who warned me? She pressed her hands together tighter and said nothing. The wedding night suite was the kind of room that makes you feel like a better version of yourself just by standing in it. High ceilings, tall windows, the city below glowing and moving and indifferent. Tobenna was at the window when she came out of the bathroom. He turned and looked at her and she felt it again, that real thing, that non-strategic, completely genuine thing. They did not sleep until very late. When she finally slept, she slept completely. The sleep of a woman who has arrived somewhere she's been traveling toward for a very long time. She woke at 2:47 in the morning. She just needed water. Tobenna was deep asleep. She slipped out of bed, moved through the dark toward the minibar, and her foot connected with something on the floor. She looked down. A small raffia pouch, dark, tied with a cord that was a very specific red-black color, not the red of celebration, the kind of red that meant something else entirely, the kind that had no business on a hotel floor in the 21st century. She picked it up. It was warm, not room temperature warm, warm like it had been recently held, warm like whatever was inside it had a temperature of its own. She turned it over slowly in the dark. On the bottom, pressed into the raffia, were 3 marks. She didn't recognize them. She would find out what they meant later, when she described them to her grandmother and watched the old woman go completely still. When Lolo Chidema said in a voice stripped of everything except fact, "Those marks mean the womb has been presented. Whoever placed that object in that room was telling the covenant, she's here, she's ready, begin the watch." But that was later. Right now, she just stood in the dark holding a warm object that should not exist and looking at her husband sleeping with his face completely untroubled. She placed the pouch back exactly where she found it, got her water, went back to bed, lay in the dark with her eyes wide open. In the morning, the pouch was gone. She checked everywhere, nothing, as though it had never been there. She said nothing to Tobena, but in the filing cabinet in her head, a new folder had opened. No label, just a question mark, just a 2:47 in the morning feeling sitting in her chest like a stone she couldn't locate. She told herself it was nothing, old family custom, something cultural she didn't understand yet. She was always very good at telling herself things. After the wedding, they settled into the family compound in Enugu for 3 months, Mama Oluwaku's request. Warm, generous, framed as tradition. "Let me have you both near me for a little while." Tobena had a project running nearby. Zara arranged remote work. The compound was magnificent in the way things built over decades are magnificent. Not loud perfection, but settled authority. Mama Oluwaku ruled it with a warmth that was total and a control that was absolute. And somehow, both felt like the same thing from the inside. Adimchi and Sochima lived in the East Wing. 5 years of marriage, no children. The compound spoke about this in the particular Nigerian way. Never directly, never cruelly, but in the language of extra food portions and extended prayers and the specific tenderness people extend to a wound they've all agreed not to name out loud. Sochima was 31. She'd been beautiful in a way that was still present, but had been through something, like fine fabric washed too many times in water that was too hot. The beauty remained, but there was a tiredness behind it that lived in her eyes. She and Zara were friendly from the first day, carefully friendly. Sochima was kind, she was also careful. And Zara noticed that Sochima never let conversation go past a certain depth, like a woman who'd learned that deep water was expensive. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in the 4th week, Zara found her. Guarding behind the East Wing, sitting on the concrete edge near the water drum, doing absolutely nothing. No phone, no book, just existing in a stillness that was not peaceful. And crying, silently. The way someone cries who's cried so many times the sound has exhausted itself and only the water is left. Zara sat beside her without announcing herself. Neither of them spoke. Then Sochima said, "She would have been 4 years old this month." Zara went still. "My 3rd. I've lost 3. Each time, the pregnancy was perfect. I would reach 7, 8 months. The baby was healthy, I was healthy, the deliveries were perfect. Strong cries, good weights. The kind where doctors smile and say congratulations." A pause. And then within days, they would just stop. No warning. The baby would be fine at the night feeding, and by morning, nothing. 3 times, Zara. 3 times I held a living baby and then had to hand back a body. "Sochi, what do you mean there was no explanation?" The doctors used the word unexplained. Unexplained infant death. 3 times, as if saying it enough times would make it sufficient. She turned and looked at Zara fully. It was not sufficient. And in those eyes, Zara saw it. Not just grief, something underneath, something that had been thinking, quietly, for a very long time. "How long have you been married?" Sochima asked. 3 months. "Are you pregnant?" "No, not yet." Something moved through Sochima's face, relief or the shadow of it, the expression of someone who's just checked and found a door still unlocked. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked toward the main building, measured the distance. "Sochi, talk to me." "I can't." "Why?" "Because the last time I tried to," she stopped hard, pressed her lips together, shook her head. "Nothing. I'm sorry. Forget I said anything." She stood, rebuilt the smile with the speed of someone who'd been doing it for years. "Come inside, I'll make tea." She walked away. And Zara sat in that garden with the stone in her chest, now the size of a closed fist, and she understood that the folder in her head, the one that had opened at 2:47 on her wedding night, had just received its first document. 3 healthy pregnancies, perfect deliveries, babies that stopped breathing within days, no cause. 3 weeks later, Zara saw the woman in the grey Corolla. She'd taken to walking the outer edge of the compound at dusk. She was doing this when she noticed a car she'd never seen before. A modest grey Corolla, dusty, entirely out of place. Beside it, speaking to Mama Oluako in a voice so low it was nearly swallowed by the evening, stood a woman. Old, thin in a specific way. The thinness of someone who'd shed everything unnecessary until only purpose remained. She held something wrapped in black cloth against her chest the way you hold something both valuable and volatile. Mama Oluwaku's back was to Zara. The posture said clearly, "This conversation is not for other ears." Zara pressed herself against the storehouse wall, controlled her breathing, listened. The wind kept eating sentences. She caught fragments only. Of the second son's wife, not yet. Of the season is opening. Of the account must close. Of the river does not wait. And then, one full sentence the wind chose not to touch. Once she carries to term and the child draws breath, it is done. You cannot stop it once the life has entered the world. Mama Oluwaku responded. The old woman nodded, handed over the package, and got in the Corolla and drove away. Zara stood against the wall in the settling dusk and did not move. Once she carries to term, once the child draws breath, her entire body had received a signal it wasn't designed to process. But the part of her that was always strategic did not shut down. It sharpened. She walked back inside, had dinner, laughed at Tobena's story, helped Mama Oluwaku carry plates, said good night to Sochima. That night she lay beside Tobena in the dark and assembled what she had. The pouch, the 3 marks, begin the watch. Sochima's 3 pregnancies carried to term, perfect deliveries, babies that simply stopped breathing within days. The phrase, "the account must close," once the child draws breath. The second son's wife, not yet, the season is opening. Hair. She thought about the phrase draws breath, not miscarriage, not stillbirth, a baby born alive, a baby that breathed and then stopped. And the doctors would find no cause, and everyone would grieve, and an old woman would drive 4 hours and go home. Not stillbirths, babies that arrived alive and were taken. She did not sleep. In the morning, she'd made her decision. She found Sochima in the kitchen before anyone else was awake. She locked the door. Sochima looked at the locked door, looked at Zara. Her face moved through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Alarm, calculation, and then something that looked like a woman who's been holding a very heavy thing alone for too long and is simply, finally, too exhausted to keep holding it. "Zara, I heard something at the far gate last night, enough to know there's something I'm not being told." Zara sat down and put both hands flat on the table. "I need the rest, all of it. You don't understand what it costs to... Tell me what it costs." Sochima looked at her hands. "My brother, Emeka, 22 years old, he woke up one morning 2 years ago and he could not speak. Aphasia. No medical cause. He hasn't said a single word since." Her voice was barely moving air. "The week before it happened, I tried to call my mother. I was planning how to leave." The kitchen was completely silent. "She told me, Mama Oluwako." She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. That was the most terrifying thing, how calm she was. She sat down with me and said, "Sochi, you are part of this family now. Whatever you try to carry outside these walls will cost you something you cannot afford to lose. Do you understand me? Whatever leaves this compound leaves as nothing." And Emeka? Emeka lost his voice 4 days later. Zara held very still. I understood. I stopped. I stayed. Sochima looked up. That is why I cannot. I know. I understand what you are risking. I'm asking you to risk it anyway because what I heard last night, Sochi, they are waiting for me to have a child, a living baby that draws its first breath. And then, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Sochima's face confirmed everything. Tell me everything, Zara said, from the very beginning. Sochima looked at the locked door, looked back at Zara, and something in her, some final mechanism of self-protection, quietly, carefully, stood down. She began to talk. 12 years ago, the Eze family was dying. Mazi Eze, the patriarch, Tubena's father, had a disease that consumed his wealth before it consumed him. The land, the contracts, the name, all of it was bleeding. Uluako watched it and felt a desperation that existed beyond grief, beyond prayer, beyond anything the church had ever prepared her for. She went to a man, not a pastor, not a doctor, a man whose name was spoken only by people who'd exhausted every door that opens in daylight. He operated 4 hours from Enugu, in a compound with no signboard, in a language older than anything built over it. What she traded, Sochima did not know in full. What the covenant required in return, that she knew. Wealth restored, land multiplied, the Eze name rising above his generation. 3 sons protected and prospering beyond what their father had built.
The price, a living child. 1 living firstborn from each son's marriage. Not a miscarriage, not a pregnancy loss. A child born alive, breathing, collected within the first days of life, taken silently in a way that would look to every doctor like sudden, unexplained infant death. The kind that happens and breaks people and has no answer. 3 sons, 3 firstborn children. After the 3rd collection, the covenant would be complete and permanent. Adimchi married first, a woman named Ifechi. She got pregnant, but that first pregnancy ended early. A natural miscarriage at about 4 months. She never carried to term. She never gave birth. There was no living baby. The covenant didn't count it. The ritual required a child born alive, breathing in the world for the collection to be made. Since there was no living birth, no payment was recorded. Ademchi's account remained open, waiting. Ifechi got pregnant again. This 2nd pregnancy, this was the one the covenant was waiting for, the first one that would produce a living birth. But during this pregnancy, late one evening, Ifechi came back to the compound early from a visit. She was walking toward the main house when she heard Mama Uloaku's voice coming from the corridor. On the phone, speaking low. Speaking in a tone Ifechi had never heard her use before. The 2nd one is holding. She's past 7 months now. When she delivers, we proceed. Ogade will come the 3rd night. A pause. Yes, once it draws breath, the window opens. You will know when. Ifechi stood in the dark outside that corridor and felt something in her body go cold. She didn't confront anyone. She was smart. She went quietly to her own people. Old women in her home village, women who didn't ask many questions, who listened with their eyes, who did something over 3 days that had no name, but that settled over her unborn child like a second skin, invisible, ancient, immovable. Her baby was born, a girl, alive, breathing, perfect. 3 days passed, a week, a month. The child lived. The covenant had come for that baby and found a door it couldn't open, something older than itself standing between it and the child. Ifechi's daughter breathed and grew, and the covenant couldn't touch her. And this was the problem that broke everything. The covenant logic was built on sequence. 3 firstborns, 3 collections. Adimchi's first pregnancy hadn't produced a living birth, so it didn't count. But the 2nd pregnancy had produced the living firstborn the covenant needed, and that child was supposed to be the payment.
But the child was protected. The child lived. The collection couldn't be made. Adimchi's account couldn't close. The firstborn of his line was alive and walking around, protected by something the covenant couldn't override. Ifechi understood enough to know that whatever had protected her child wouldn't protect her indefinitely inside this family. She packed. She took her daughter. She left in the middle of the night. The divorce was handled quietly. Adimchi married Sochima, and the covenant, its first account still open, still waiting for a payment it couldn't collect, turned to Sochima. It waited for her to conceive. She did. It waited for the pregnancy to progress. She carried to term. Perfect pregnancy, healthy delivery, a living, breathing baby boy. 3 days later, the baby stopped breathing. Unexplained infant death. But here's what made it worse. Sochima's baby wasn't Adimchi's firstborn. The covenant knew this. The firstborn of Adimchi's line was alive in Abuja, protected, untouchable. So when the covenant reached for Sochima's child, it found itself in a contradiction it couldn't resolve. This wasn't the child it had been promised. This wasn't the firstborn it needed to close Adimchi's account. So it took the child anyway, not as the required payment, as something else, as the act of a desperate, frustrated thing that had been denied what it was owed and was feeding on whatever came close enough. The account didn't close. The debt wasn't satisfied. Nothing was resolved. Sochima got pregnant again, carried to term, perfect pregnancy, living baby. The covenant came for that one too. Still desperate, still feeding, still unable to satisfy the debt because the child it needed, the actual firstborn, was in Abuja, breathing and growing and beyond its reach. She got pregnant a third time. By now she was breaking from the inside, but she wanted a child so badly. Perfect pregnancy, perfect delivery, living baby girl.
The covenant took that one too. 3 babies. 3 times Sochima held a living child and then handed back a body and heard the word unexplained and felt her mind fracture. And Mama Oluwaku had sat at her bedside every single time, held her hand, prayed over her eyes dry, completely dry, because Mama Oluwaku knew. Ogadi, the old woman in the grey Corolla, had explained it. The account was corrupted, feeding without collecting the required payment. It would continue feeding on Sochima indefinitely because the specific debt it needed couldn't be resolved through Sochima. That firstborn was protected and gone. But there was one solution. If the second son's wife carried a child to term and delivered a living firstborn, a clean, complete, undisputed firstborn of the second son's line, the covenant could apply that collection as a substitute payment. It would use that one child to close both accounts. Adimchi's broken account would be closed by proxy, and Tobena's required slot would be filled at the same time. 2 debts settled with one child, Zara's child. That was the solution. That was why Mama Oluwaku had been so warm to Zara, why she'd held Zara's hands in that Ikoyi restaurant, why she'd insisted they stay in the compound for 3 months, why she'd personally arranged the wedding suite and placed the raffia pouch on the floor herself. The 3 marks that meant this womb is presented, begin the watch. Zara sat in that kitchen and let the full shape of it arrive. She wasn't a wife. She was a solution to a problem she'd never been told existed. How much does Adimchi know? Zara's voice was even. He found out after the second loss. He confronted her. She told him enough, that the family had made arrangements that were already in motion and couldn't be reversed, that trying to stop it would cost everything. And he accepted that? Sochima looked at her hands. He chose the name Zara, the compound, the life. He chose all of it. And then he came home every night and slept beside me and watched me grieve our children. The silence was enormous. Does Tobena know? I don't know. I've never been able to tell. Zara stood up. Her legs were steady. She was glad they were steady. I'm going to handle this. How? I don't know the full shape yet, but I need you to trust me. Zara, if she finds out,
Emeka is already silenced. You've already paid the highest price she could ask. She has nothing left to take. Something in Sochima's face moved, like a window opening in a room sealed too long. Trust me, Zara said again. Sochima looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. 6 days later, Zara's period was late. 4 days, then 5, then 6. She drove to a pharmacy alone, bought a test, sat in the bathroom stall with the test in her hands and understood, fully, physically, exactly what was at stake inside her own body. A baby that drew its first breath, and then. She sat with those 4 words for the longest 3 minutes of her life. The test came back negative. She sat and stared at it and felt a relief so violent it was almost like falling. She sat in that stall for a long time, not crying, not planning, just sitting with the reality of what a negative test had just meant in a way it had never meant before. But the 6 days had done something that couldn't be undone. The danger was no longer a story. It lived in her body now. It had a physical address. It had visited and found the door unlocked, and she'd simply been lucky, this time, that it hadn't entered. Luck wasn't a strategy. She called her grandmother that evening. Not her mother, her grandmother, Lolo Chidimma, 91 years old, living in a village with no reliable electricity and something else entirely. She drove out the next morning, Sochima covered without being asked.
Lolo Chidima was in her backyard sorting dark leafy things when Zara arrived. Her eyes came up and found Zara's face and read it completely before Zara reached the gate. "Sit down," she said. Zara sat. "Tell me what you know." Zara told her everything. The pouch, the marks, the overheard conversation, Sochima, the covenant, Ifechi's first pregnancy ending naturally, the second pregnancy protected, the baby escaping to Abuja, Adimchi's account left open, Sochima's 3 babies taken as desperate collateral, the shortcut, Zara's firstborn offered as substitute payment to close both accounts, 2 deaths, 1 child. When she finished, the backyard was very quiet. Lolo Chidima's hand had stopped moving. "The Eze family," she said, almost to herself. "You know them. I know what they were before the money returned. I know what people said about the source." She looked at Zara with the full weight of 91 years behind her eyes. "I want to ask you something, the truth. Ask, why did you marry this man?" Zara opened her mouth, closed it. Her grandmother waited. And in the silence, something happened. Some wall, maintained for years by deliberate effort, developed its first real crack. "I wanted what his family had," she said, quiet, exact. "The name, the land, the compound, the life. I saw it, and I decided I wanted it before I knew him. What they had was the first thing. He came after. And the question you chose not to ask. Who they were, not what they had. Who they were, what they'd built, and what it cost. I didn't ask because I was afraid the answer would close a door I'd already decided to walk through." Lolo Chidima looked at her. No judgment, something beyond judgment. "Your mother called me in March, the month before the wedding. She said, 'Mama, I cannot reach Zara. I tried and the door is closed.'" Zara's eyes were burning. "I told your mother, let her go. We cannot shield a person from the lesson that only comes from inside the fire. Some wisdom only arrives after the burning." "That's not comforting, Lolo." "It wasn't meant to comfort you. It was meant to show you that what's happening isn't only about an evil woman and a covenant. It's also about you, about what you walked toward and what you chose not to ask. The covenant found you because you walked into its architecture with your eyes on the ceiling. You weren't hunted, Zara. You walked in." The crack widened. "So what do I do?" Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. "The covenant was built on a specific violation. Ulokwo offered what was never hers to offer,
A womb belongs to the woman who carries it. You cannot covenant another woman's body. This is the oldest law, older than any covenant, older than that river. The covenant has functioned because the women inside it didn't know their own authority. Ifechi knew. She protected one child. Ifechi protected one child. She couldn't break the whole covenant because she only spoke for herself. The full violation, against every woman it was made against, was never named by the person with the authority to name it. Who has that authority? The woman the covenant is currently hunting. You. Your voice, your body, your declaration, not in anger, in authority, standing in the place where it was made and declaring clearly what was never theirs to take. Where it was made. The Oji tributary near Ozala, that's where the covenant was sealed, that's where it was be broken. And speaking is enough, just my voice. You say that as though speaking is a small thing. The most consequential things in history have been spoken. Covenants are spoken into existence. They are dissolved the same way, by the specific person with the specific authority. You are that person. When that woman stands at the source and withdraws consent that was never given, the architecture has no ground left to stand on. And the marks on the pouch. A declaration of presentation, telling the covenant, this womb is here. This is the one. Begin the watch, placed on your wedding night, so the covenant will fix itself on you. Mama Oloku arranged that suite. Yes. Zara sat with this, the specific image of Mama Oloku in that hotel suite, before the wedding night, placing something on the floor, walking out, going back to the reception, dancing, laughing, being warm. What happens to the family after I break it? Some of what was built rests on a foundation that will no longer exist. That accounting isn't yours to manage. And Tobena, her grandmother looked at her carefully. What do you believe about your husband? A long silence. I believe he felt something wrong years ago and chose not to feel it fully. I believe he's been making that choice for a long time. I believe it's not the same as knowing, but it's not the same as not knowing either. And what does that make him? Human, Zara said. It makes him a human being who has a reckoning he's been postponing. Lolo Chidima nodded once. Go to the river. Take Sochima. Speak for all the women this covenant was made against without their knowledge. Come back, then let the truth do what truth does. Zara drove back to the compound. She wasn't the woman who'd driven out. She waited 5 days, not from fear, from the specific focus of a woman who'd stopped calculating outcomes and started seeing clearly. She went to Sochima on the 4th night. Adimchi was in Lagos. She sat on the edge of Sochima's bed in the dark and said, I'm going to the river on Saturday morning before dawn. I'm going to break this covenant and I'm asking you to come with me. Sochima stared at the ceiling. If she finds out before she'll find out after, and we will face that after. Zara's voice was steady. This covenant was made against all of us, Sochi. Against you, against Ifechi, against me. Not one of us was consulted. It was built on our bodies without our knowledge. I want you at that river when it ends. Not as a witness, as a voice, because yours has been taken for too long. The room was quiet for a long time. Zara, yes. My children, the 3 I lost, I know. Will breaking it bring them? She stopped. She knew the answer. No, Zara said gently. It won't bring them back, but it will make sure no other child is taken the same way. And it will mean that your next pregnancy, if you choose, won't be reached by something that had no right to reach you. Sochima was quiet. Then, Saturday. Before anyone wakes, she turned her head and looked at Zara in the dark. Her eyes were different. Something that had been very far underwater for 5 years was slowly surfacing. They left at 4:40 in the morning. The compound held its breath around them. No movement. The generator had cycled off. Just the dark and the cold air and their footsteps on concrete. Sochima drove. Zara sat with her hands quiet in her lap, and everything her grandmother had told her burning in her chest. 20 minutes, red earth road, trees thickening until the tributary appeared, that specific bend of the Oji where the trees pressed in from both banks and the water moved with the particular quality of water that's been receiving things for a very long time.
They parked, got out, stood at the water's edge. The pre-dawn dark wasn't total. There was the very first suggestion of grey at the edge of the sky. The water was low and dark and moving, always moving. Sochima's hand found Zara's arm. Zara stepped forward. She stood at the edge, and the rehearsed words didn't come. Standing here now in the actual dark, at the actual water, with the weight of everything done in this place sitting in the air, rehearsed words weren't what arrived. What arrived was older than rehearsal. "I stand here," she said. Her voice was low. The water caught it and carried it. "I stand here as the woman whose womb was presented to a covenant by someone with no authority over it. I was not consulted. I did not agree. I did not know. A covenant that requires my body as its foundation, built without my presence, without my voice, without my knowledge, has no ground to stand on. The ground it required is me, and I am withdrawing." The water moved. "I withdraw consent that was never given. I reclaim what was never surrendered. My body, my children, my future, my line, whatever was marked against me in this place, I'm removing my name from that account. Not in anger, in authority, because I understand now what I should have understood from the beginning, that what I carry has never belonged to anyone but me. And I'm here to say so, out loud, in the place where the lie was told, with full knowledge of what I'm reclaiming and full understanding of what was never theirs to take." She paused. "Let the river receive that. And I do not speak only for myself." She turned. Sochima was 2 steps behind her, trembling in a way that wasn't fear, but the physical response of someone for whom something enormous is moving, tears running silently. But her eyes were open in a way Zara had never seen, fully open, actually there. "Come," Zara said. Sochima stepped forward, and she spoke. Her voice broke in the first sentence, and she didn't stop. Broke again, and she didn't stop. She spoke through the breaking because the breaking was part of it. 5 years of a woman who'd been required to grieve silently, finally grieving out loud. "3 times, she said. 3 times I carried a child to the edge of the world and held them alive and then had to hand them back as bodies. 3 times I was told unexplained and I accepted that word because I didn't have the real word yet. I have it now. The real word is stolen. My children were stolen by a covenant I never agreed to, for a debt I never owed, by people who looked me in the face and held my hand and knew. I'm standing here and I'm saying, what was taken from me was not payment. My children were not currency. My womb was not a transaction. Whatever was opened in my body without my consent is closed now by my consent, by my voice, by me, standing here, knowing what I know, saying what is true." She stopped. The river was very quiet. Then the air changed, not dramatically, not with lightning or sound from the earth, just a shift, the specific shift of pressure that's been building for years, finally releasing, not with noise, but with the quality of silence that follows when something held taut is simply let go. Both of them felt it at exactly the same moment. Sochima made a sound that had no name, and Zara held her there at the edge of the Oji as the sky began its first real commitment to morning, grey becoming blue, blue beginning to consider gold. 2 women standing in a space they just reclaimed, breathing the air of it. They were back before 7. Mama Oluwaku was in the kitchen, making tea, back to the door. She stood at the counter for 3 full seconds after they walked in before she turned. 3 seconds that were the sound of a woman acknowledging that a thing she'd been managing for years had just ended in a way she hadn't chosen. She turned. She looked at Zara, then at Sochima.
She looked at Sochima for a long time at the dried tracks of tears, at the specific quality of her posture, something that had been curved inward for 5 years, standing differently, straighter, more present. And then, something happened in Mama Oluwaku's face. Not rage, not threat. The expression of someone for whom a very long performance has simply ended. And what was underneath wasn't a monster. It was an old woman. An exhausted old woman who'd been carrying a terrible thing for 12 years and had spent that time becoming the kind of person capable of carrying it, which is its own kind of devastation. She sat down. "How much?" she said. No command, no warmth. Just the bare fact of the question. "Everything," Zara said. Silence. "I did what I did for my sons," she started. "I know. The family was, I know why." Zara sat down across from her. Not with hatred, something more complicated. "I understand that you are a woman in a desperate place who made a decision that felt like the only door open. I can hold that understanding and still tell you what that decision cost. You held Sochima's hand in a hospital 3 times. 3 times you sat at her bedside and watched her break, and you knew what had broken her, and you said nothing. You held her hand, and your eyes were dry, and you said nothing." Something moved across Mama Oluwaku's face. The movement of a wound being described accurately by someone who knows exactly where it is. "What happens now?" "Now, you tell your sons, all 3 of them, tonight, everything. And if then I will." Silence. Mama Oluwaku looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at Sochima. And Sochima, for the first time in this kitchen, in this compound, after 5 years of practiced smallness, did not look away, did not smooth her face, did not reach for the smile. She looked back, directly, with the full open eyes of someone who'd stood at a river in the dark and said true things and come back carrying herself differently. And it was that, not Zara's words, not the threat. It was Sochima's eyes looking back without flinching that finally broke something in Mama Oluwaku. Because Zara was new, but Sochima was 5 years. Sochima was 3 children. Sochima was the woman she'd held at the hospital and called my daughter and prayed over with dry eyes. Sochima's eyes looking back was the mirror she couldn't turn away from. Mama Oluwaku put her face in her hands, and for the first time, her eyes weren't dry. Zara told Tobena everything that evening. She told him without editing, without softening, without strategic management. She gave him all of it. She watched his face the entire time. She was watching for guilt, for recognition. What she found was more complicated. She found a man being opened from the inside by something that had always been there and had been kept from reaching his surface. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, his hands pressed hard into the mattress. "Sochi's pregnancies," he said, low. "Yes." "They carried them to term? The babies were born alive?" "Yes." "And my mother was there, every time, holding Sochi's hand?" "Yes." "And she knew what was taking them?" "Yes." A silence. "And Adimchi." The way he said it, not a question. The way you say something when an answer you've been avoiding has arrived and you recognize it by the weight. He found out after the second baby. He chose the name and the compound and the life. Tobena's jaw tightened. "And me? When Ifechi's situation resolved in a way my mother clearly hadn't expected, I felt something I couldn't name. I went to her and asked. She gave me an answer that was just enough to make my discomfort stop asking, and I accepted it." He stopped. "Because I wanted to accept it?" "Yes," Zara said. "When Sochi started losing her babies, I felt it again, every time. And every time I told myself it was medical. I told myself I was being irrational. I told myself my mother was good and this family was good, and there was nothing underneath I should be afraid to look at." He paused. "I was lying to myself, Zara. Not carelessly, deliberately. I knew I was doing it. I chose to keep doing it, because the alternative was this." He gestured at the room, at the evening. "This is what I was protecting myself from having to face." The room was very quiet. "I know," Zara said. That's not the same as not knowing. No, she said. It's not. He stood, walked to the window, stood with his back to her. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned, and what she saw in his face, what she saw in a man standing inside the full weight of what his family had done and what his choices had cost, settled a question she'd been carrying. The question of whether what was between them was real or was simply the most expensive item on her old checklist. It was real. Checklist items don't crack open in exactly that way. He said, I need to speak to my mother and my brothers tonight. All of them. Yes. Don't leave this room. I'm coming back. Yes. Whatever comes after, we face it together. She held his eyes. Together. He left. She sat alone and thought about her mother's voice. Find out who these people are before you find out what they have. She thought about the compound and how magnificent it had looked that April afternoon when the checklist was glowing. She thought about how long you can look at a building and never once ask what's underneath it, never once wonder what was laid down in the dark before the walls went up. I had to come inside the fire to understand the fire, she thought. I had to be standing in the middle of the trap to learn what I was actually worth outside of it. That's not a comfortable lesson, but it's a real one, and real lessons are the only ones that stay. The conversation lasted 6 hours. Zara wasn't in that room. She sat in the wing and felt the compound hold its breath. Ikem, the youngest, came out near midnight and sat on the corridor floor with his head in his hands, the face of someone whose entire understanding of his own life had just been disassembled. Zara brought him water, sat beside him without speaking. He took the water, didn't speak. She stayed for a while. Adinchi didn't come out, not once in 6 hours, not for water, not for air. She thought about that, about what it cost to sit inside a room where the specific weight of your specific choice was being named, not someone else's choice, yours, the choice you made with open eyes and had been sleeping beside the consequences of for 5 years. Before dawn, she heard Adimchi's footsteps. He didn't pass her door. He went directly to the east wing. And then, through the wall, in the hour before the compound woke, she heard Sochima. Not the silent, managed crying she'd developed over 5 years. The other kind, the loud kind, the kind that's been held at enormous pressure and has finally found space to release. And underneath it, a man's voice, low, broken, saying something over and over she couldn't make out. She didn't need to make it out. She lay back and looked at the ceiling and let them have that. The next morning, after Tobena returned to their wing and slept for 3 hours with the exhausted sleep of a man who dismantled his entire understanding of his family, then Zara asked him the question.
Are you going to report her? He looked at her for a long time. Report what? He said quietly. That our mother made a spiritual covenant 12 years ago and babies died from unexplained medical causes. Every doctor's report says natural death. There's no evidence a court would accept. No prosecutor would touch it. And destroying her publicly won't bring those children back. He paused. But she would live the rest of her life in this compound with every single person in it knowing exactly what she did. That's not mercy, Zara. That's a different kind of prison. Zara thought about that, about Mama Oluwaku moving through that compound every day, sitting at that table, looking at Sochima, looking at her sons, carrying what she'd done not in secret anymore, but in the open, under the gaze of everyone she'd used. She thought about mercy and punishment and which one was actually harder to live with. She didn't ask again. 9 days after the river, Zara looked out the window and saw the grey Corolla. It came in slowly, parked on the red earth. Ogadi got out. She stood beside the car and looked toward the main house. Then she looked, and this part Zara couldn't explain, directly toward the window where Zara was standing. Across the whole width of the compound, a look that lasted longer than distance should have allowed. Then Ogadi got back into the grey Corolla and drove away. Without entering, without delivering anything, without speaking to anyone, without collecting anything. Just came, looked, left. Zara stood at the window until the dust settled back to the red earth. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. Not to announce,
not to manage, not with the carefully assembled version that made her look best. She called her mother and said, "Mommy, you were right about everything, all of it, and I didn't listen and I should have, and I'm sorry." The line was quiet. Then Adana said, "I know, my daughter. Aren't you going to say you told me so? What will that add? The lesson already taught itself. You went in and you came out and you brought yourself back with you. That's what matters." They spoke for 2 hours, the longest honest conversation they'd ever had, the first one Zara had entered without a prepared position. Her mother's voice on the phone at dusk, that was the thing she'd been managing herself out of for years. The simplest thing, the most available thing, the thing that had been there the whole time she was chasing other things. 3 months after the river, Sochima is pregnant, 8 weeks. The scan is completely clear. She's told no one except Zara, and she's sleeping better than she has in 5 years. She said to Zara, "It feels different, like something that was listening has stopped listening." The Azeh construction business didn't collapse, but 2 contracts fell through, both later found to have been acquired through arrangements that didn't hold in the light. The family didn't fall, but it was recalibrated. Mama Oluwaku still lives in the compound. She's different, not destroyed, different. The warmth is still present, but it has no second floor now, no strategy beneath it. Honest warmth is recognizable once you've lived inside the other kind. Adimchi and Sochima. Sochima is still there, still in the East Wing, still in the marriage. She'd made that choice with her eyes open in a way she'd never been able to before. 2 weeks after everything was said and settled, Tobena and Zara packed the car. They drove back to Lagos. Same road they'd taken after the wedding. Same red earth giving way to tarmac. Same Enugu hills behind them. Same road, different people. Tobena drove. Zara watched the landscape move past. The afternoon sky was doing something extraordinary. All that depth and orange, the kind of sky that looks like it's been paying attention to everything below and is choosing not to comment.
She thought about the list, the 5 items, the filing cabinet that had organized her intelligence in one direction for so long. The cabinet was still there. She was still sharp, still the woman who read rooms and moved through the world with intention. That wouldn't change, and she didn't want it to change. The direction had been the problem. What the intelligence had been aimed at had been the problem. The first item in the cabinet had changed. Not family money, not a name that opened doors, not a house that silenced enemies. Who are these people? Not what do they have, not what does the name unlock. Who are these people truly in the dark when nothing is performing? What have they built and what have they broken and what have they left in the water and what do they do when the cost comes due? That question, before any other question, she wished she had asked it first. She was grateful in the way you're only grateful for things that have burned you down and rebuilt you, that she'd had to learn it from the inside. Because some wisdom doesn't travel. It can't be handed across a table or absorbed from a mother's warning. It has to be lived. It has to cost something real. It has to find you standing at a river at 5 in the morning, saying true things into the dark before it actually belongs to you. Some echoes only reach you when you're standing in exactly the right place to hear them. Tobena reached across without looking and found her hand. She let him find it. The Lagos style line appeared on the horizon, distant, glittering, indifferent, familiar. The city that doesn't stop for any one story. The city they were returning to as different people, which is the only worthwhile reason to return to anywhere. They drove forward into the rest of their lives with open eyes. The woman who chases the house may find out too late what the house was built on. But the woman who walks into the fire and comes back out, who stands at the river before dawn and reclaims what was never theirs to take, she becomes something no house, no name, no compound could ever have given her. She becomes the kind of wealth that has no price and no covenant can touch. This is Echoes of Wisdom by Crystal. Share this with a woman who needs to hear it, because the most dangerous trap is the one you walk into with your eyes open, thinking you are the one setting it. If this story moved you, don't just watch and scroll. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And tell me in the comment, what would you have done if you were Zara? Stay with us for more stories that open your eyes and stay in your heart.